adjust my hat.
Who wristlocked you?
Vaguely.
No, I know. I just wanted you to say that for the podcast because we're recording now. What's going on, guys? This is Aaron and Cody with the Grappler's Dilemma podcast. We are recording episode 4 for you today. How's your week, Cody?
Great. Thanks for asking. I was kind of on the end of getting over a cold, which was annoying, but I don't know. Sometimes that's a good opportunity to take better care of yourself and just clean up your living situation a little bit. And so,
Yeah, sometimes it's like a forced break.
yeah.
Like you have to take your foot off the gas a little bit.
Yeah.
Well,
How about you?
good week. This weekend I went to an Arnis seminar with Kelly Warden. So it was like stick fighting. We didn't do any knife, but like some empty hand stuff. And I went with one of our mutual buddies. It was really cool to be around like a diverse group of other practitioners from other arts.
Yeah.
And it is funny because it's kind of
There's a different character.
different character.
Of people who train different types of
Yes,
stuff. Yeah.
precisely. So it's like, jiu-jitsu kind of has their stereotype of personality, right?
Yeah.
And you see it like in meme form and all that kind of stuff all the time. The same thing with these other arts. So I found that very very amusing and very fun. So yeah.
Yeah.
That was,
Well,
that
in
was pretty
case
cool.
you guys don't know, Aaron loves stuff like that.
Yes, I
Um,
love it.
There'll probably be. We'll talk about that in more depth some other time.
Yeah. I think I'm
weapons training,
but I think
whatever kind of niche stuff.
I'm gonna make it
like,
more. I think I'm gonna do it more. Like there's a group that I've learned through this seminar, so I'm gonna go like train with them a couple Sundays from now after church and stuff. So I'm like, looking forward.
Maybe
to
I'll
that.
have to join you. 'Cause
Yeah.
it sounds like it's a sort of whole area of martial arts I haven't really explored much outside of like I was telling you, I did fencing when I was a little.
Let me let this barking dog out real quick. Okay, and we're back. I think that it would be awesome if you ended up joining me for some other arts, because so far Travis is the only one that has been willing to like come with me to these things. And I'm getting to a point where I'm just going to stop asking people because I feel like
a dork.
like a dork. Like nobody wants to entertain it. I'm so like amped on certain things. I'm like, yo, we learned this stuff. We did this knife fighting stuff. And yeah, nobody really seems that nobody's as jazzed about it as I am. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, so to get into more of the topic, actually, let's start off with we'll call it the question of the day. Question of the day, and this is something I was thinking about on the drive home, was, and hopefully this wouldn't put anybody off of ever wanting to train jiu-jitsu or martial arts, but what is the worst injury you have ever gotten training, and what is the worst injury you've ever witnessed someone else getting while training?
Well, the second question we probably have the same answer to.
Yeah, that's likely.
But I've been very lucky, thank God, to not have too bad injuries. But the worst one, I got a really bad bruised AC joint, which is like where your collarbone ends.
Okay.
It's like part of your shoulder. And I was in De La Riva Guard as a white belt against a very good, lanky purple belt. And he had me all tied up in De La Riva Guard. And I was still going through the phase where I thought maybe if I just like spam somersaults that I can escape positions. And I didn't realize the way that he had my sleeve trapped was not going to allow me to somersault. So,
Gotcha.
And he kind of swept me too. I think I sort of felt the sweep coming, so I tried to roll through. Yeah. And he just spiked me on my shoulder hard.
Was it like your first significant injury training?
Yeah, I had to take at least 2 months off.
Did that feel like when you get injured like that, at least for your first, like when you have your first big injury, right? Everyone kind of, usually if you train long enough, you're going to, something, it just happens.
Yeah.
Did it put you off of wanting to go back to train, or was
Not
it
at
more
all.
of a, no, I mean, yeah, I understand that.
It was just frustrating because,
Sure.
jiu-jitsu is so addictive, and when you can't, I mean, the classic thing is like people come back too early.
Yeah.
But I was pretty smart about it. I got really into swimming.
Okay.
That's a great
Low
way
impact.
to rehab, especially a shoulder injury.
Sure.
And it felt strong by the time I came back, and no serious shoulder injuries since then.
Yeah.
Knock on wood.
No kidding.
Same question you, and then I'll answer the second part afterwards.
The worst injury I've ever received grappling was not jiu-jitsu. It was judo. I broke my foot, and it was like a small break, and it took... The break was so what ended up happening is this happened over the course of a year. So this injury happened. The guy went to throw me. He was much more experienced than I was, but had been out of it for a long time, as far as I understand. Threw me and then just fell on top of my foot, and it rolled. And I remember that sound of like, like I don't know. There was like this texture to the rolling of the foot, where I felt like I could feel every individual bone and ligament just holding on for dear life.
Yeah.
And so I get up, I try to walk it off, and it's like when you get kicked in the shin so hard you can't put weight on it. That's kind of that, like, oh shoot, okay, something's wrong. Anyway, I sat out for like a few minutes, and then I got and started training again. And I knew it was kind of one of those, this is gonna hurt bad in the morning.
Yeah.
And then I walked around with a limp for probably 4 months. Like, okay, something bad's going on. I need to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
So I went to the doctor, and they were hitting me with cortisone shots every month. Boom, boom. And it would be cool for like a couple days, and then it would get painful again. I'd be limping around again. They're like, okay, well, we're going to continue these shots. We're also going to give these orthopedics, and we're going to do these x-rays. Like, okay, sweet. They didn't see anything. So then they did a CAT scan, and then they finally, this was probably 8 months, and I'm like, hey, something is wrong. I've been an athlete most of my life, and like I'm barely functioning. I'm limping around everywhere I go. Like at work, I'm limping around, and people are saying something about it. So there's clearly something going on. And they were finally like, okay, we're gonna put you in an MRI machine. And I remember how he presented it. He goes, well, you weren't wrong. And I remember thinking, like, yeah, no kidding, I'm not wrong. I've been coming here for 8 months, like telling you guys something
my
bad.
foot is broken.
Yeah, so he's like, yeah, there's a piece of broken bone floating around, and the reason you're limping is because it's chewing up the muscle tissue in there, so it's not like it's never healing.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so we need to have schedule a surgery for us to go in there and remove the bone fragment.
Yeah.
And it took another 3 months for that to happen.
Oh man.
They took the bone chunk out, which I actually kept. Apparently you're not supposed to do that, but the doctor was like, well, if it disappears after I leave it on it was sick. He was pretty cool about it. I don't know if I threw it out or not.
I think you should be able to keep it as part of you.
Yeah, I agree, dude. This is literally as mine as anything could ever be. And but yeah, so then the recovery was like another month, walking around on crutches and stuff. But the entire time I was so fresh that I couldn't train, no weightlifting, nothing. I just played a bunch of video games and
you could bench press.
Yeah, I mean, I did start lifting with a boot on still. That was for sure. But yeah, and then the reason I asked like the worst injury you've ever witnessed was because I thought it would be like kind of a neat thing to explain, since we were both there for what I would imagine was the worst injury I've even seen happen, not just in training, ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, like to see it.
I would have to agree, yeah. Yeah. I mean, without going into too much detail, I don't want to go into the gory detail. I also don't want to be like too disrespectful.
Sure.
Basically, a training partner of ours, last summer, he's actually made a remarkably quick recovery.
Yeah, big time.
He's back on the mats, but
and he would come in while he was on crutches and in a cast, just like hang out, which I thought was awesome.
Yeah. He just kind of stepped funny in like a stand-up exchange with a very, very tough wrestler. I think maybe he was on a single leg, and so he stepped funny on his free leg. I don't know anybody that actually witnessed the injury except the guy he was training with. And just like snapped his leg near the ankle.
It wasn't even like the joint that blew out. It was like a break on his leg,
the tibia,
bone.
I think, yeah.
Which is, and it sounded like a baseball bat.
Yeah, and it was just like, you looked at the way the foot was angled, and it just like didn't make sense to your brain, and just made your whole body like feel really uncomfortable.
Well, yeah. Speaking of the final part, like a final bit to that story, my brother was training there. He stood up. This is like, it goes snap, and everyone stops because it was that loud that everyone just like stopped training, looked over, and then my brother's like, I can't be in here, and then just walked out of the building. He was like, right, I thought he was gonna pass out.
Yeah.
Which I always found, he's my younger brother's like, dude, that's funny. It's pretty hilarious that you couldn't hang.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, like you said, we don't want to scare people, but it's part of the sport. There's risks involved, but I'm a really big believer that if you train in the right way, that really serious injuries are pretty low percentage compared to a lot of other sports that you can
agree.
Like pick up basketball or something. I think is way more dangerous.
Yeah.
Small minor injuries, nagging injuries, chronic issues, probably more what we deal with, and that would be a good show topic actually sometimes.
Yeah. Recovery, rest and recovery. But yeah, so the topic of today's episode, the meat of it was, and I prefaced this with the last podcast. I was curious because we were talking about how we got into martial arts and stuff, and I think that everyone who gets into martial arts at one point or another had some type of I don't know, like a role model, or I don't want to use the word like, or maybe hero, right? That person that they look to, like, man, this is the greatest martial artist of all time. That really you think back to fondly, even if now you look back on it, you're like, okay, it's kind of crazy that I was even into that because it's so ridiculous based on what I know now. So I was curious, like, who were just a couple of those guys for you that you can remember?
Yeah, so you asked me about this last week, and I wrote down a lot of names. I don't know if I will cover them all, but the first one that I can remember is actually a fictional character, an animated character named Goku from Dragon Ball Z. I just got really into that show at the age that, a lot of boys probably do, like 11, 12, 13. And, the show's absolutely ridiculous. I'm sure a lot of people know of it. There's not a lot of depth to the story, but the characters are very lovable, and it's like, I think what people like about it. Plus the fight scenes are fun.
Sure.
But the thing about Goku, there's kind of two things. One is like the show sort of impressed upon me like the importance of like training and hard work, and it was one of the things that like I probably started working out around that time, just like doing push-ups and pull-ups.
So I've never seen the show. And that is a sentiment I feel like I've either heard people say or like I've seen memes about the internet.
Yeah.
So like, is it just like, why is that?
It's just a constant theme you see in the show is like different types of training regimens that are like really, really difficult. Sure. And at the beginning, he can barely do it. Like, he goes to train with this master, and he lives on a planet where the gravity is like super, super strong, and he has to catch his monkey, and the monkey is like way faster than him because he's not used to the planet's gravity. Gotcha. And so it looks like totally hopeless, but then a couple episodes later, he's moving better, and then, by the end, he's like sprinting and running down the monkey, or, or he's just doing like thousands of push-ups with like weighted clothing, or, all kinds of ridiculous stuff like that. And it's just sort of, you just see him like progress to like always newer and newer and newer levels of power. And so I think that's what I loved about the show, and I think it sort of inspired that idea of like to always like push more and more and more for more and more to like improve your potential. And
you saying that all of a sudden made me feel much better about sharing my love for Surf Ninjas, because
fair enough.
That seems so ridiculous as someone who's never seen it. Yeah. And it's one of those shows that I have kind of wanted to get to, just because it kind of has one of those followings, even amongst martial artists too.
I think it's kind of too late when you're an adult, but
and there's
maybe
so
when your
many
son
episodes.
When your son is a little bit older, maybe if he gets into it.
Hey, we're into Power Rangers right now, so there's certainly
that's a good start.
Hope. There's certainly hope.
So then another one was Bruce Lee.
Okay.
I talked a little bit about reading his book, but before that, I just had seen a couple of his movies as a teenager, and what strikes me about Bruce Lee is he just has style. It's sort of hard to capture exactly, but he was really like a product of China and America.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's sort of understood like what's like cool about American, that like other countries are always sort of they're like, oh yeah, America, cool,
Yeah, gotcha.
And so when you watch Enter the Dragon, it's just like cool in a way that like Chinese kung fu movies were not
Sure.
as much.
Yes.
And just the way he fought, there's a style to it and a swagger to it that is just really appealing. Whether it's that realistic or not, you could argue, but
What was the first Bruce Lee movie you saw?
Enter the Dragon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it the one with the tournament one where they're on the island?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's most people would say is the best.
That's the first and only one I've seen.
Yeah.
And I probably watched it as recently as like last year.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
And I think Bruce also gets a lot of credit for really like innovating. I've talked about this a little bit, but innovating the idea of like developing your own personal style based on how your body naturally moves and what's effective and what's not. And that's sort of like a big departure from a lot of traditional martial arts that he came from. So again, I think that's sort of like the American influence where he wasn't necessarily bound to this culture where you do things a certain way, and he was sort of more willing to think outside the box. He trained with Judo Jean LaBelle. He trained with other people, and he has the famous quote: "Absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, and add what is uniquely your own." And that really is like a great philosophy to martial arts.
Sure.
I think it's like you want to focus on what's effective, but there's also an element of self-expression.
Sure. That's where the art,
there.
right?
Yeah.
The art in martial arts. I can understand that.
So I have a few more I could mention, but I want to hear some of your heroes.
So this is gonna be kind of corny, and I feel like every episode I've said something kind of cornball, but I kept on thinking,
just be who you are, bro.
Yeah, just be you, man. I'm just gonna be me, bro. But I kept on thinking about, okay, my youngest memories of martial arts, and all of those memories include my dad. So, like, I don't remember a time where I didn't kind of look at my dad as a martial artist. Even when I became an adult and he was no longer training, I still always looked at him as being a martial artist, because growing up, it was, he introduced me to Jackie Chan movies and used to talk about Taekwondo, and there was it's hard for me to put my finger on it because it was never explicit, and I feel like me, and now more recently my youngest brother, we're the only ones that really like attached ourselves to it. And so, maybe it's an individual experience that you have with a parent, right? This is how I kind of identified my dad growing up, as this Marine who was a police officer and a martial artist growing up and all this kind of stuff. And your dad's your first role model, so those aspects of him were things that I kind of tried to emulate. But I remember him, like, when we'd roughhouse, grabbing me or my brother by the head and kind of setting us on the ground, saying things like, if you control their head, you control the body. But saying it kind of like tongue in cheek, like, or just a little like trying to teach lessons that he was trying to play up like the grandmaster character, like trying to be funny with it, but there was actually wisdom in whatever it was he was saying. So I think that my first martial arts hero was totally my old man, because
let me just interject and say I don't find that to be corny at all.
Oh, well, thank you.
And I think it's just important, like, part of manhood that fathers do things with their sons like that, whether it's martial arts or sports or outdoorsy activities or handiwork. It's not weird that you like those memories made a strong impression on you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just interesting that they came up while I was thinking, like, it was like guys like Chuck Liddell and Jackie Chan are in my head. And then I was like, but my old man, that was the first guy. And I remember him having like, bringing batons home. And I can't remember what the type of baton was, but he would bring these things home that were like kind of obsolete or old riot gear. Or
Nunchucks.
he'd have a set of nunchucks, or he'd get us some and like want us like, here you guys go, like just because he'd want us to.
I can't imagine what could go wrong.
I know exactly, but I think there was something about him that liked seeing us get into it as well, right? Because it was something that clearly, even when you talk to him now, it was being a martial artist growing up, and it was something that obviously had a significant impact on him, like all the reading and the study and the training. So yeah, I would say that was the first person. And like one last thing, I was just talking to someone about, when you grow up with role models and being thankful for the guys that you have in your life. Like my dad was like, my earliest memories were this blue dumbbell that he had in his closet, right? From the time I was a little kid, and always think like, man, this is incredibly heavy. And then it was still in there when I was in my 20s, and I picked it up. I was like, man, you have those kind of like nostalgia bombs when you come across things like that. So, I mean, my dad is really, he's the one who put me on the path when it came to like fitness and martial arts and stuff. So I think that he would have to be the number one on my list. But a close second would definitely be Jackie Chan because, which my dad's gonna listen to this, and you made the list with Jackie Chan, and you were above him, so you should be proud of that.
Nice.
But I just remember, and again, like attached to my dad, I think those were the first like martial arts movies my dad ever brought into the house because they were relatively tame. And we have this conversation where it's like, even the stuff that was more sensual was done in a comedic way. So even as a kid, it wasn't like overly sexualized or something. It was something like, oh, this is just kind of silly and a guy getting nervous around a woman or whatever. And then the Drunken Master, I remember feeling like I was getting away with something, my dad letting me watch it. And then going back to watch it now, it's like so goofy, but
it's a little raunchy.
It's a little raunchy, that's for sure.
So what are like some other movies you remember?
Ooh, the Rush Hour movies. I think the Rush Hour movies are kind of up there, but like what else did he do? It was more the newer ones. I didn't watch a lot of the classics. Like Rumble in the Bronx was one. But like the Rush Hour movies, like Around the World in 80 Days, Shanghai Nights, Shanghai
Operation
Noon.
Condor.
Oh, I never saw that one.
Oh,
no, never saw that one. But the thing about Jackie Chan I thought was so cool is he was so good in the movies, but he did all of his own stunts. That was the thing that I will always remember when someone told me that. Because I remember when camera tricks, like that term, you don't really hear that anymore. But growing up, it's like, oh, it's just camera tricks. Tricks. I was like, well, they have computers and stuff now, but that's like old terminology. But I remember telling my dad, and I can't remember what movie it was, but saying like, oh, camera tricks. And he's like, actually, no, Jackie Chan does all of his own stunts. And then at the end of the movie, usually they'd show him going through this stuff, and it blew my mind.
And getting hospitalized.
And getting hospitalized. Yeah, dude, breaking his neck or his feet and continuing on. So yeah, that would be...
The craziest one that I've seen is, well, in Police Story at the end, he does this stunt where he basically like jumps from like 4 stories up.
Yes.
And got really hurt.
He fell through the awnings, is it that one?
Yeah, I think he like grabs onto like some hanging lights to slow his fall, but it's like, that's a wild stunt. But then the other one is in Rumble in the Bronx where he broke his leg.
Yep.
Doing a jump, and then, or maybe his ankle, and then he does a stunt in the movie where he's like being pulled by a boat. It's like a hydrofoil boat with the hanging onto a rope behind, and then he like gets up and starts barefoot water skiing. It's one of the most best stunts like ever done.
Oh, it's so crazy.
That's a really hard skill. That's like something people spend years learning.
Isn't that? It's just learning unreal. How to do it, it's just unreal. Because
and it's just a great concept too. Is like he's chasing after the bad guys, and they get away in a boat, and then he like He like chases after the boat and ends up like hanging on to like one of the ropes that is used to dock the boat, and then he just starts barefoot water skiing.
Dude, that's so good. But those are the kind of bits that are like. Yeah, because he didn't take himself too seriously. It didn't seem like he would allow himself, versus like a Steven Seagal where he's like, I will never lose in a fight scene.
Right.
Ever. That's part of my contract.
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, we got to take a quick break because I have to feed our bearded dragon. And we're back again. 2 breaks in one show. We have taken 0 breaks in the previous 3 shows. But if Matt and Shane can do it on their podcast, I think that we're going to be okay.
We edited it out all out in post. Or not.
But I have to leave this in because it's like kind of a bit at this point.
That's fine.
The third person I want to mention, because I feel like I'm sweeping through like these heroes. Of course, right? Ernie Reyes Jr. was like a big one for me growing up. But I wanted to say Chuck Liddell was one of the guy that really got me into actually training. And I probably wouldn't have gotten into jiu-jitsu if it wasn't for like really having this stint of being kind of obsessed with fighters. And Chuck Liddell was like the stereotype, like the perfect stereotype for mixed martial arts and fighting, right? This Mohawk guy with a tattoo on his head that was just knocking people out, was super intense. But that was like, I wanted to be that guy, just like this roughneck, blue collar seeming fighter. So that was, I would put that guy on my list as well. As far as being someone who kind of motivated me to want to at least explore that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, that ties in well with my next couple. So once I started training, or actually once I started getting interested in jiu-jitsu, I remember watching, there's a video, and I would recommend this if anybody hasn't seen it, of Joe Rogan and Eddie Bravo breaking down his rematch with Royler Gracie at Metamoris. So if you guys don't know, Eddie Bravo is well known as the founder of 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, close friend with Joe Rogan. And he really made his name because he was the first American to ever tap a Gracie in competition. And he tapped Royler with a triangle in 80cc, early 2000s. I don't know exactly when it was. And then about 10 years later, I think, they had a rematch that went to a draw, but Eddie pretty definitively like dominated a lot of the exchanges.
So why was it called a draw?
Because there was no submission. It was a submission only match.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess I just I kind of resonated with this character a little bit. I was like, this is not what I would normally think of as a fighter. And I just began to understand that he had really developed like his own unique approach to jiu-jitsu that's very creative, that's very tricky, that uses a lot of flexibility. And while I don't endorse the glorification of the glorification of cannabis. I mean, if you use cannabis, it's whatever. And I know a lot of jiu-jitsu people find it helps with recovery or with their jiu-jitsu or whatever. Like, that's none of my business. But I do want to mention, I do disapprove of like just the High Times magazine kind of culture of like making it like it's a cool thing. But
it's one of those addictions that gets a pass for some reason.
Yeah,
you know,
but anyways, I don't know. I just loved like the creativity, and it sort of ties in with a couple things that we mentioned. But one of the things that I would give Greg Soder's credit to in this sort of eco debate is questioning this idea of like proper technique. And it's like, oh, you need the coach to show you proper technique, which I do still kind of feel is there's something legitimate to that. But also techniques change, and like our understanding of what is good and what's not and what works and what's not changes over time. And sometimes you get these characters, and I think maybe a lot of us have done this to a lesser extent, where you are sort of like experimenting with a new position, or you do some dumb thing as a white belt, and your coach might tell you, you shouldn't do that. But you just believe in the position, you believe in the concept, and over years you hone that into like a really dangerous game. And I feel like Eddie is not the only one. Well, I think a lot of people are like this, but he really exemplifies that, where like he just believed in his system, and it's like unlike anybody else's jiu-jitsu. And while I don't really do very much of what he does at all, it's more just that innovativeness and self-belief and creativity that I found very inspiring. And then there's another part of that breakdown where he's telling you about like what's going on in the match and what he's thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like times where you think, oh, Euler is maybe putting him in danger here. And he's like, actually, I let him do that because I realized I needed to concede bottom position here in order to get this grip. So then once I got that, then I could sweep him back over it. And I just like understood like the chess game that's going on with these, with these high level grapplers. And also he talks about how he would like joke around with him, and he'd be like, because in their first match he got his guard passed really easily, and then he was or something like that, and he was like, oh, it's not so easy this time, is it?
Yeah.
And not like be doing it in a funny way.
Sure.
And he said that like he feels out of his element if he feels like a guy is really angry with him, and he likes to use humor to sort of disarm people. And I kind of resonate with that.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
you probably know that like I'm one of these guys that will talk on the mat a lot.
Sure.
And especially if I feel that kind of aggression, I'll try to diffuse that, because I sort of feel more comfortable when it's more like a game.
Yeah. It sets a tone. Right? Yeah. I think that's a great tool for setting a tone for roles, especially with people you don't really know that well.
But anyways, in some ways I sort of resonated with his personality.
Okay.
And it sort of showed me like, it made me believe that I could be a good jiu-jitsu guy, even though I'm not necessarily, don't have the personality of like a fighter type.
I was listening to, that's such a cool thing that you pointed out, because I was thinking about this on my drive home. I was listening to a podcast that a guy named Paulo Rubio, he's this Canadian Kali Filipino martial arts guy, pretty good footprint online, but he was saying, he was kind of talking about making that transition from when you kind of lean on your instructors, or you lean on people that have more experience than you, as like, well, what would you do? What would you do here? What do you think about this? And then you get into a place where you're confident to put your own thoughts forward and speak them with a sense of, I would say a confident humility to it, right? Where you're not suggesting that you're like the ultimate authority, but you still understand that based on your experience, your opinion has a certain amount of weight and value to it, and making that transition. So like when I hear stories about guys like, you hear Eddie's story about going into was it the Machado brothers? Is that where he got his black belt, where he goes into that gym for the first time and gets like tapped out? He's like, I can learn how to do this.
Yeah.
Going from that to being one of the most recognizable schools and practitioners of jiu-jitsu in the sport,
Yeah. A great diplomat for the sport.
Absolutely.
In my
Absolutely. What you talking about that match? Have you seen like the video where he comes home after that and he's like walking through his small dirty apartment and he's like, this is what
that's
you get.
After the first match.
Oh, is it? Yeah. That's
By the
right.
second match, he had like established his brand.
Okay.
And was doing well for himself.
Gotcha.
And he felt like he was sort of defended the legitimacy of 10th Planet.
Okay.
As a thing, because like he was going against this legendary guy, and Hoyler's doing like bread and butter, classic fundamental jiu-jitsu at a very high level. Like he had a really dangerous knee cut.
Okay.
And he almost passes Eddie a couple times. Eddie's like just got hanging on by an ankle.
Sure.
But Eddie like got into his game and like demonstrated use of like the lockdown and the electric chair, and that's another thing, by the way, is he's known for these very bizarre names.
It's awesome.
Of all these positions and all these moves, and I just really think there's something to that. I was listening to Danaher recently, and some people give him a hard time about using the Japanese names.
Kitami.
Yeah. And he says, I don't insist upon you using one name or another, but you do have to have names.
Yeah.
And I've noticed some people are kind of lax about that. They're like, oh, I do this a lot. I don't really have a name for it. It's like, you should give it a name.
Yeah.
Like, I just think part of what we're doing is like, we're by analyzing the chaos of two bodies on the ground and, naming naming things, like you sort of get control over it by naming it,
You
and
define it. You
yeah,
literally are defining
yeah.
it.
And so I'm big on names and like names of moves, and I like to sort of like weigh different. Oh, this move is often called this, this, and this, and this, but in my opinion, the best name is this because
I wonder if
X,
that's
Y, Z.
like, does Danaher talk about why he chooses to use a lot of the Japanese terminology?
It's just to give credit
Okay.
because he says, like, even though the Brazilians really popularized the sport, they didn't actually innovate a lot of moves, and you can see most of those moves in the Japanese system that came before. So,
Gotcha.
you know, that's why he calls it Juji Katami, because they were, at least in recent history, the first culture to really develop like an understanding of an armbar,
Mm,
which they call Juji Katami. So
gotcha.
I respect his reasoning. I think
Yeah, I think that's fine.
if it maybe can seem a little silly, I think it just, does it work for your students as a coach, I think is really.
Yeah, I mean, even I think even referencing things, you know, with Japanese terminology, maybe for some people, it has a way of solidifying it in their brain, like what the position is and
Sure.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the naming of moves, dude. I think that's one of the best things of the 10th Planet guys that I wish more guys kind of embraced.
Yeah.
Like I could name off 200 professional wrestling moves,
Yeah.
and like I would not be able to do that in jujitsu because it's just things aren't as defined. But I guess the movements
Yeah.
maybe in pro
I
wrestling a
think
little more.
there's something to, like, creativity and like novelty
Yeah,
is related to memory really well. And so I
sure.
think, like, if you're like, um, staple the knee, underhook,
Mm-hmm.
collar tie, hip switch, that's like going to be less memorable to people than if you're like, okay, you go Wolverine to egg salad to, especially if there's a reason. It's like,
Yeah,
oh, it's called Wolverine because it's like the way he does his claws, or
sure.
or you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, that's sort of more exotic kind of naming. I think it has a usefulness in
Dude,
terms,
I totally agree.
and like a lot of times, like trainers or like weightlifters, you use those type of cues to help you like do the movement right. They'll say like, I don't know, you would know better than me, but they'll say like, start the lawnmower.
Sure.
That's like a good
Yeah.
example.
We were teaching.
I think that's more effective as a coaching strategy than like engage your latissimus dorsimus.
Yeah. Yeah, like what is that? I don't know what that. Yeah. I was showing someone a choke recently, and that's literally what I said is like, you need to pull this like you're starting a lawnmower. Like that's what this should
Yeah.
feel like. And it clicked immediately.
Yeah.
Like it was like, okay, why can they not do this? And then I
Yeah.
explained it as that. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, there's the choke right there.
And then if they're in competition, they get that choke. As a coach, you go lawnmower, lawnmower.
Yeah,
Seriously,
dude, sure. Then they'll kind of like pick it up. I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. Um anyway, so another thing that I wanted to talk about tonight is, when I think about like heroes and role models that you have and that you have had in your martial arts journey, it made me think that, we're purple belts now. We've been doing this for, you know, we've been doing martial arts in some capacity for a good chunk of our life, I would say, right? And, now that we're purple belts, I feel this sense that people do look to us for a little bit more guidance on certain things, and not to be too self-aggrandizing um when I say these things, but I was just curious, like, so say someone were to talk about you as being, I really look up to this guy, or this martial artist, right? And they reference you. What are some things that you hope that they would take from you, or like that they how they perceive you? Some things that you do your best to emphasize that you hope is being passed along to the next guy.
yeah. So I wrote down a couple things. Number one, technically, I would like, definitely by black belt. Maybe
Mhm.
people don't say this yet, but like by black belt, I would like if someone was describing me, oh, you know that black belt, like he's very tricky.
Yeah.
They have this expression in basketball culture where they say he's got a deep bag, like
Like
meaning
deep
like
bag
a
of
bag of
tricks.
tricks.
Yeah.
Like who's a good example? Kyrie Irving
Okay.
has a deep bag, and to me in jiu-jitsu, that's like you're dangerous from everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
especially as a smaller guy and not the strongest guy. I can't always just force positions that I like,
Mm-hmm.
but I think I do pretty well in terms of like no matter what you're trying to force, I have an answer for everything, and it kind of is constantly disrupting what
Gotcha.
you're doing, and I like that trickiness, sort of like I was talking about with Eddie, where I like the idea of beating somebody because you're outsmarting them.
Hmm.
And another thing I'd like people to say is that I'm hard to control and hard to submit and hard to rattle. That
Gotcha.
like you could smash my face into the ground and like put a lot of pressure on me, and you're just gonna hear me go, and then I'm gonna get out.
It's awesome.
Like I think being calm in the storm is a huge part of jujitsu and
Sure.
of martial arts, and that's something that like I strive for. On a more personal level, I would like people to think that I am a generous training partner in terms of knowing when to allow people to work, not always having to win, not always having to dominate the position. Um, One thing that I really try to pride myself on is like not getting people injured
Yeah,
and not
totally.
wanting the submission at all costs.
Yep.
I was just teaching kids class today, and I was trying to explain to them that if you have an arm bar, you should be able to hold somebody in an arm bar position with their arm straight without applying a ton of pressure to their elbow for several minutes.
Sure.
And it's like one of my favorite things to do is to just like hold that arm position and like
Mm-hmm.
feel them wiggle around.
Yeah.
And it sort of is like, feels like you're like playing a video game with the
Yeah.
joystick and you're like following them
Sure, dude.
and just waiting, especially with beginners, just like waiting for them to realize it's like they're not getting
Yeah.
out.
Just tap.
But I think it also, there's a sort of a mercifulness and a generosity that I would strive for as a martial artist, where I'm not gonna hurt you,
Sure.
but I can control you.
Yeah.
But also being generous in terms of like taking time to help people with their game
Yep.
and to say a word. And I try to give people like a big picture sense of like the reason that you keep struggling is because you're too accepting of, like, you keep accepting bottom position, or you keep accepting the grips that I take,
Mm-hmm.
or you're being too aggressive, and big picture stuff, because I think especially beginners get so caught up in all these details
Yeah.
that if you're going to add extra instruction, like out of just being a generous training partner, to me it's important to like give them big picture things that are going to help them and not like drown them in more technical
Yeah.
details.
No, I think that's great.
So yeah, that's sort of the way that I would like people to think about me and the experience of being a training partner with me.
Sure. Man, those are really good. And we actually have an overlap um with that last one. So actually I want to say that first. The idea and I hate to admit this, but I in the past I have caught myself when it's time to like get a partner for rolling, whether it's been at our school or other schools I've been a part of, and it's like, man, the guys that I usually like to partner up with aren't here, or man, I'm gonna get stuck with like this new guy. Sometimes, selfishly, my brain says, dang, I'm not gonna get the like quality reps I want to get out of this. I just want to be able to train. I don't want to have to instruct. And then you start to realize, like, at some point, someone did this for you.
Yeah.
And you were the guy that was annoying to be a partner with. And that guy was having to take take that night to teach you more than he was getting his quality repetitions in. And I think that we owe that, and I recognize that now, and so now I kind of like I feel happy at the chance, because I also remember what it was like to when I was the new guy, and I have to partner up with this guy who's a higher belt than I am, and
Yeah.
it was kind of nerve-wracking even as an adult. And so um now I kind of approach that in the same way that you were saying, where it's like, okay, I have this wisdom, and this is kind of what I would wish I would have known at that age, and um I would like to be able to share this with you, that sort of thing. So I look at it as this opportunity more than it used to feel kind of like a chore. And I think that it took some I had to mature into realizing that no, at some point someone did this for me, so like you should pay that forward, right? You honor the people that helped you by paying that forward. Um from a technical standpoint, and this is going to be kind of interesting, I think, for anyone who's rolled with me and is listening to this, or maybe even for you as well, but I would like to really be known as a guy who really understands the art of the pin and top pressure. And that's coming from a guy. I spend most of my time looking for sweeps and stuff on the bottom, and then taking top position and moving a lot. But and I talked about this guy either last episode or the episode before, but Courtney Muse, when he that was what if jujitsu felt like to me, was just this crushing top pressure that I couldn't get out from, even though I felt like I was a strong guy, and I just felt helpless, right? And there was something about the way Courtney knew how to pin and keep my weight down and you know, take away limbs so I couldn't bridge and move into things. Um, that was something that I still identify with wanting to the be the guy on top. So I think that's one thing that I would like to develop, because I'm certainly not there yet. I think a lot of my game is built around
You're getting there.
get built around sweeping, but the pressure passing system. He was a big pressure passer, and so that's kind of why I started stepping that up. But from a technical standpoint, I would like to be that to be kind of a thing that I was known for. Um, and then I guess I wasn't really, for me personally, I didn't really think so much about the technical side of things. I do want to be known as a guy who was a complete martial artist, like I talked about previously, but like a guy that was willing to take the time to study other arts and really thought about himself as being a martial artist and not just a jujitsu guy. Not that there's any problem with that, but I think about martial arts in a little bit more of a meta scale, I suppose. Um, and then would also like for I would also like to be able to give the impression that I don't take myself too seriously, because I've certainly been guilty of that. Um, Especially when I was younger, right? Going into cop work, and it was all about this kind of knuckle dragging gun ho, being kind of a hard ass. And I feel like I brought that into jujitsu for a certain portion of my time on the
Oh,
mats.
interesting.
Yeah,
See, I've
and
never had that experience of you
well,
personally.
maybe that could just be a mentality shift. Maybe I never put that out, but it was just always what was in my mind a lot.
Well,
And
I met you right sort of at
on
the
my way
end
out,
end of your
yeah,
police
you're right.
career.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. That was definitely a big change that was a change in where I was mentally. That's for sure. But
Yeah, I
um,
think it's important to be fun
yeah,
person to train with.
yeah, yeah. Not everything is like hear it's especially online, right? It's this life or death constantly. It's like, dude, this stuff was fun first. That's why you started doing it. It wasn't like you just walked in off the street and then you wanted to know how to well, maybe some people, but
Yeah.
like you know how to kill people really bad. Like there was a aspect of it that was fun and entertaining and playful.
Yeah.
Like jujitsu is more fun for me when there's of course there's two sides. I like every now and then getting those like hard rolls, and I like competing and this kind of stuff too, but I find that what puts the biggest smile on my face during training is when me and my partner are being playful with it. And
Yeah.
like we're talking a little bit of shit while we're
Yeah.
rolling, or we're looking for kind of cheesy moves like wrist locking each
Yeah. Yeah.
other, and it's done with this kind of
Wrist
like,
locks are not
oh,
cheesy though. They're
yeah, I know,
very
yeah,
practical.
starting to learn that now, but I like and I'm starting to learn that more with like striking too. Like if I just am having fun with it versus like being so worried about, man, I'm getting punched in the face, I'm sucking at this, and it's like, let's just have fun out there. Like this is supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
I want to be able to be that guy, because I know that especially jujitsu. And I think that a lot of people get like, you want to preach the gospel of jujitsu sometimes, right? And so like you first get into it, it's like, you need to train. Like, what are you doing if you're not training jujitsu? And I think the one,
if somebody tackled you on the street, you would have no answer.
Yeah, exactly. And I have been that guy. I have certainly been that guy. And I think that part of that came from, in law enforcement, so few guys knowing how inadequate their skill set was. And it's like, dude, we do this as a profession, and I was late to the game too, but everyone should get in on this.
Yeah.
But then you start to realize, like, not everyone needs to be. There's me and my buddy Greg used to talk about, okay, if the world ended and we had this compound, but dude, we're just a bunch of meatheads, right? We still need like our gardeners and our artists and all this kind of stuff. But we were both in this mindset. We were like uplifting this role that we thought we fulfilled in this hypothetical apocalyptic community. But then when you started diving into it, you're like, oh man, we need all these other people. Like this, you're not a less than just because you're a dude who doesn't choose to learn how to fight, or you're not necessarily fit or something like that. And again, it was like a moment of maturing when you start to think of things in that terms. And but yeah, the preaching the gospel of jujitsu and martial arts, I do it with much more of a sense of joy versus like, you need to do this.
Yeah.
This is a responsibility and a duty for you as a man to be able to have I have been that guy. But yeah, I guess I've just grown up a lot, and now I realize that that's not the way. And I want to be someone who, doesn't take himself too seriously, and puts joy back into the sport versus putting too much of a harsh edge to it, because there's enough of those people out there. I don't need to be an extra one.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah. I mean, we have just a few minutes left.
Well, I think that was a great topic. And so we're going to be doing this new format, I think, where we're sort of alternating host duties. And so I'll be hosting next episode. And I have decided, this is probably kind of a no-brainer. It's something that our conversations sort of keep coming back to, and also some of our loyal followers have kind of requested that we talk more about self-defense and jiu-jitsu.
Heck yeah.
So that will be next week's topic.
Right on. All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening. If you guys want to get in contact with us, we have an Instagram. It is at The Grappler's Dilemma. We also have an email if you are not on the socials, and that email is thegrapplersdilemmapodcast@gmail.com. If you have any questions or suggestions for the show, feel free to hit us up and let us know. Anyway, get out there, stay safe, keep training. Os.